Welcome to Better Sex, where you get the information and inspiration to create and enjoy your best possible sex life. Join your host, sex therapist Jessa Zimmerman, as she brings you expert guests, helpful tips, knowledge, and strategies to improve your intimate relationships. And now, your host, Jessa Zimmerman.
Hey everybody, it's Jessa. Welcome back to another episode of the Better Sex Podcast. I appreciate you being here, taking the time and tuning in. And before we start today, I just want to share again a new free resource that I have for you, which is a recording of a webinar I did called How to Make Sex Easy for Both of You Without It Feeling Like an Obligation. It was an incredible conversation, lots of information to share, including the 3 mistakes that almost everybody makes that is actually making sex more difficult, making your sex life more difficult. So it's crucial that you learn this stuff and then get an idea of what do you do instead, right? How do you actually create easy intimacy? So you can go to intimacywithease.com/training and get immediate access to that webinar, and I invite you to do that. Today's show is a great example of how I picked a topic that is going to apply directly to very few people and yet really applies to everyone. So I'm going to invite you to listen to it, whether you have a spinal cord injury or not, because Mitchell Tepper, my guest, has done all this research and all this work around sex and disability. But the findings, what he learns about what really creates great sex, a great sexual relationship, great communication, all of this stuff applies to everyone. It's not about your genitals. It's not about your functioning. It's not about your ability to get aroused. It's these other things. And it's just so vital, even if your body works just like you think it should or just like you want it to. So, of course, anybody with a spinal cord injury is facing some of these challenges and adjustments. But this information is really, really valuable for everybody. So I hope you enjoy it and get a lot out of it. And before we start the show today, it is sponsored by Intimacy with Ease. It's a method to help otherwise happy couples achieve a sex life that is easy and fun for both of them, so that you can actually just enjoy your sex life with zero stress. For more information, if you want to watch a brief little training video that's available, all of that, go to intimacywithease.com. So, Mitch, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you having me with your great list of experts you have on your site.
You can join them. I would love to start just hearing a little bit about how you have gotten into, working with people or researching people with spinal cord injury. I mean, what's the backstory on your interest in this topic?
Well, I mean, often they say, research is me search or whatever. Very personal experience. I acquired a spinal cord injury when I was 20. And so, kind of like the prime of the life. I was a lifeguard and, broke my neck in a diving accident. And this was extremely important to me.
Yeah.
At the time I was in business school. So that wasn't a particular academic focus of mine. But, I suffered a loss, with my spinal cord injury. And I had a lot of questions about my own sexual function. And, I also often talk about my rehabilitation was all sexual rehabilitation and research, trying to figure out why, for my situation, why I got an erection, but I couldn't ejaculate, why I didn't really feel the same. Will I ever be able to have kids again? Is anyone going to ever love me again? And so, I went to figure these things out on my own, and I just took it to another level.
Yeah. So you've got a label, or people call you the prophet of pleasure. Is that? I don't know. Do your friends and family call you that, or is that just on your Amazon profile?
I am the self-defined prophet of pleasure, and I've had that handle, for over 20 years. When I got into this work in the research and education in the late 80s. I broke my neck in 82. I didn't really transition into doing research in this area till I was getting my master's in public health at Yale.
Okay.
And I did this national study of sex education and counseling and spinal cord injury rehab program. So when I, got into the work in the late 80s, a lot of the focus on sexual health was on HIV and AIDS, STDs, and unintended pregnancies. So
Right.
the focus wasn't really out there on pleasure. Maybe in the 60s it was, in the 70s with the sexual revolution. But I think, we took a cultural pause. And at least what I was seeing was mostly focused on, danger and negative aspects of sexuality. I was working on helping people optimize their sexual function and their response after an injury or chronic condition, helping people regain that feeling, of feeling alive and those good feelings that come along with sexual feelings. So I was always focused on pleasure, and I felt it was my calling.
Yeah.
And I moved from business to public health to specifically focusing on sexual health. And so, and in the beginning, there was no career path for me. So I had to create my own. So it was like, I was the prophet of pleasure, speaking the word, spreading the word that sexuality could be a positive thing. And I also called myself a sexual entrepreneur by default.
Yeah.
So there was no career path for me, and I had a degree in business first and in public health. I, in 1996, created sexualhealth.com, and that ran for 15 years until I sold it. And unfortunately, it's not there anymore, but it was one of the first domain level sites giving advice. And so, this was my calling. I did it because I loved it, not because I was earning any money at it. And I continue to do it. Sometimes I earn money and sometimes I don't. But I think the work is valuable work, and it's needed out there. So
Right. I have two different things in mind in talking to you today. Part of it is about hearing a little bit about what happens for people with spinal cord injury, what's possible, all that kind of stuff, but also how all of this is applicable to able-bodied people, right? People that haven't had these injuries, because I'm sure that the learning and the insights that you have and the way you think about this, it doesn't matter, right? This is all
Exactly.
a really, really important element. So when you got into this and started studying it, researching it, was there anybody else doing it? Are you the pioneer of this? What was the sort of state of the field at the time? What have you been researching since then?
It's funny that you used the word pioneer, because I was researching for something online with my name. I was trying to actually figure out when I started to use Profit of Pleasure, and I put my name in Profit of Pleasure, and I found somebody's online presentation on sexual pioneers with Kinsey and Masters and Johnson, and the last one on this thing was me. But I can't say, there was Sandra and Ted Cole in the world of sexual rehabilitation and sex and spinal cord injury, who really developed a lot of the literature there. And Sandra Cole, when she was president of ASEC, I remember her handing me the baton. She was on stage and passing that off. And so there were people who came before me, but I think like I said, I made this my life's focus on just this area. I don't know if there was a lot of, there were some women in the disability movement who spoke about sex, but not pursuing it as their life work. But I would say I am a pioneer, but not the earliest,
Right.
I would definitely claim to be a pioneer in sexuality online, in sexual health online with, doing a domain, website, sexualhealth.com in 96.
Right.
So, and that, although I started it for people with disabilities to end the silence around sex and disability at the click of a mouse, which was novel in the mid 90s.
Yeah.
The site became quickly a leading site for everybody. I had hundreds of thousands of viewers. And, the majority of the content over time was not specifically geared towards disabilities. Although in the beginning, all my experts either had disabilities with MDs or PhDs or worked closely with. And in the beginning, when I had 8, it was like 7 out of 8 were with disabilities. And then when I had 68 experts, less than a dozen of us were that. And it just became, like you said, something good for everybody.
So how do you distill down? I'm not even sure what to ask you here. How do you distill down your research? What do you want to share about what you've learned over the years of this work? Well, for people who've had spinal cord injury first, and then what this means for everybody else.
It goes to both, as you said. I often say you don't have to break your neck to be a great lover, but you could learn a lot from someone who has. So I had to learn, and when I teach other people, not just spinal cord injuries, I've worked with young people, teenagers with all types of disabilities. I say, you have to know more than everyone else about sexuality, right? About human sexuality. And then you have to know about the specific aspects of your disability and how it affects your sexuality, including your sexual function, your sexual response, and your sexual expression. So I talk about function when I'm talking about pretty much reproductive function, and response when I'm talking about overall body response, and expression. Because some people with disabilities have no problems with function and response, but can't express themselves. So I work with young people with cerebral palsy who get erections or could have intercourse, and nothing mechanically is wrong except for they can't speak and they can't move in a way where they could express their sexuality. So when I talk about my research, I boil it down into this, looking at through both laboratory research, which we could talk more about later, with Drs. Beverly Whipple and Barry Komisarek, into orgasm in women with spinal cord injuries and these fMRI studies, and through qualitative research, which I did both with the women in the laboratory and men and women afterwards with spinal cord injuries, looking at people who experienced orgasm and who didn't, and try to understand why some people with spinal cord injuries were able to regain that ability to feel pleasure and orgasms and others didn't. And I asked people about sexuality after their injury, and then, what their thoughts were, what their first sexual experiences, and about their peak sexual experiences, whether they had orgasm or not. Mm-hmm. And so what I found out from studying people with spinal cord injuries is that the peak sexual experience needed to be with a partner that they trusted and they felt safe with. And when there was trust and safety, there was a feeling of connectedness. And these were their words.
Right.
And that is universal. So when I started to learn more about sexual trauma, and I never really thought of myself as having sexual trauma or people with disabilities, but then I started to study more about trauma, and people needed this context, this safe space of trust and safety and connectiveness to kind of move forward. And I'm like, okay, I guess, if someone has an injury, now I have, spared sensation, but not full function. But if someone has an injury and they're cut off from feeling in their genitals and function in their genitals and movement, that's a form of sexual trauma.
Yeah.
But, I mentioned before we get started, I listened to Dr. Peggy Kleinpeck's, your interview with her.
Right.
And I love Peggy. I love her work. And she looked at people who experienced magnificent sex, right? Great sexual experiences. Her and I, we both look at how to help people optimize their sexual health. And so, your listeners can go back and listen to her. And they looked at people, through the age range. But like my research, she found that what makes for magnificent sex has nothing to do with genital function.
Yeah.
And everything to do with this kind of relationship between the partners and their ability to be creative and to have these discussions. She calls it consent, but being able to negotiate what they want sexually, letting go of what they thought they know.
Yeah.
So my folks, they had to get rid of these thoughts that, sex equals penis and vagina intercourse, and all the myths they learned before their injury and things that were bombarded with the media. So just like her population said, they have to kind of let go of these very limited notions of what sex is about and be creative and allow themselves to kind of really experience their sexuality for themselves and with each other and share that. So these are this trust, safety, and connectiveness being the combination that allows people, at least in my research, to transcend any physical loss to experience pleasure and orgasm. So that's my kind of universal message that I came through looking at, people's trajectories from, being sexually devastated at the time of injury and feeling like their sex life was over and that pursuing it was pointless. Why bother? These are things that people told me they were themes.
Yeah.
Until they were in a particular relationship. And that relationship didn't have to be, some people in my research didn't experience this till 10, 15, 17, 20 years past their injury.
Wow.
Right? But it doesn't have to be that long. One of the women in our research in the laboratory with Doctors Whipple and Komisarek came to our laboratory specifically. It was only 3 years after her injury. She came to our laboratory because she had been abandoned by her partner, literally left on a couch after she came home.
Wow.
And she had avoided sexuality because it was, a source of pain and fear. And when she saw the call for research to go explore her sexuality in a lab, she did it because she wanted to do it in a safe place. Mm-hmm. And she was one of the 3 out of the 15 women in our labs who experienced multiple orgasms, even though she had no feeling or movement below the level of her injury. That's how powerful the proper context is. That's how powerful our mind is.
Yeah.
In all of this about human sexuality and sexual response.
Now, I don't know if in your research I don't know if you can answer this question based on your research, but do you have some sense of what difference it makes, like what age an injury happens, like how much sexual life somebody's had before the injury, or what kind of upbringing and belief systems they had around sex before their injury in terms of coming through this in a way that is fulfilling?
Two different questions. I'll do the scientific statistical ones, which I do have evidence on because in addition to doing qualitative research, I did quantitative research. So that the difference in the people who experienced in my group, and I looked at both orgasm and no-go orgasm. And so time since injury seemed to be a factor, since the orgasm group measured on average 17.1 years post-injury, and the no orgasm group averaged 10.3 years post-injury. So something happened over time. And that's where I learned about this process of sexual self-discovery. And I describe that in my book. But so what I did look at quantitatively, was there a difference in knowledge using some validated sex knowledge things? Was there a difference in attitude using validated sexual attitude? There was no difference in sexual knowledge or attitudes before injury, and the amount of both religion and religiosity, as far as how much people practice their religion and believe it, didn't make a difference. What made a difference was the time since injury, and then this other factor we measure is called sexual self-esteem.
Can you say a little bit more about what that is?
So people say, if you have high self-esteem, everything will fall into place. Well, that's not true, because there's this most cited self-esteem scale. It's called the Rosenberg self-esteem scale. And it's got 10 questions about your self-esteem. None of them are about sexuality. Mm. So how can somebody, from a research perspective, say if you have high self-esteem, everything else will fall into place? What I found, and really one of my colleagues, Dr. Linda Mona, did and she has a disability. She's a PhD sexologist and psychologist with a disability, looked at this aspect, and she saw that sexual esteem was a separate, independent measure from self-esteem, which makes sense, and that people who were born with their disabilities had, a higher sexual esteem than people who acquired it, right? Because it was natural for them versus losing something and then trying to regain it and constantly comparing.
Right.
And when I work with, so getting to the non-scientific answer, when I work with people of all ages, I find it more difficult working with older folks who, when I say older, on average, when people have a spinal cord injury or traumatic injury, is usually around 20, right? more or less, as far as spinal cord injuries, right? Older would be over 40.
Okay.
Just for relatively. So the folks who are in their 40s, 50s, fall off ladders, whatever type of injuries, the injuries are different, are harder for me, to get them to see the lights because they have so much experience. And what we learn, right? When I ask people, my thing, how do you learn about sex? Most people learn about sex from having sex.
Right. Right.
Right. They don't learn about it in school, or
right.
not about sexual pleasure or sexual response, right? They don't learn about it in church. Their doctors aren't talking to them about it. So their knowledge is going to be based on their sexual experience, right? And some are great and some are not so great. And so that's what they know. And what we usually learn is a very genitally focused, performance-based notion of sex.
Yeah.
And, for men, I have to get an erection, I have to get it in, I have to keep it in long enough for her,
right,
for the heterosexual one, and then I have to ejaculate. And even if I'm masturbating, I need to see that I'm ejaculating in as much as I did before.
Right.
Because you would not believe, like, running sexualhealth.com for 15 years, men's questions, are about the quality of their ejaculate, the quantity of their ejaculate, the force of their ejaculate.
Yeah.
We are very focused on our ejaculation,
Yeah.
And so those type of things, and women get the similar messages about sex is about, intercourse, and I don't know if folks who are gay or lesbian are getting many messages,
Right. Right.
So, I don't want to be totally heterosexist here in my presentation, but I'm giving you some stereotypic learnings that we have out there. So the more entrenched people are in that idea before their injury, the harder it is to help them kind of switch gears to let go, to move forward, and to experience, their sexuality in a different way. Sometimes many people end up experiencing their sexuality and pleasure in a better way.
Yeah. Well, because you're talking about with the trust and the safety and the connectedness. So, I mean, the stuff that really matters has nothing to do with bodies.
And I don't want to get too esoteric here, because we're not doing, I also do pleasure and orgasm, right?
Right.
So, and you could have trust and safety in a relationship that's very short term. Like some folks, their first relationship was in the hospital with somebody else with a similar disability. So they trusted them. They felt safe because they didn't have to share stuff with them. But I also teach people about their own sexual response and pleasure. So I work with, like, it's going to sound like I work with all men, but I don't. But men who come to me and, say they have a problem, with whether it be erections or they think that they have sexual compulsion problems and stuff like that. And they're so disconnected from what's going on in their bodies.
Yeah.
And I work with them to kind of focus on learning about their sensations, both in their penis, their scrotum, but the rest of their body too. And I have them, slow down. I give them exercises to do, when they're, instead of masturbating, self-exploration. And we dissect what's going on, and so they'll be able to really connect with their own pleasure, and to have, like, if somebody's constantly searching porn and masturbating to porn, have them really just do it without any images, by themselves in an exploratory way, to let me know, what the feelings are, what the responses are. And they come to learn a lot more about their responses and also in pleasing a partner, because people are going by with the idea that, all partners like you to have an erection for so long and to pump so hard, and that's not, what everyone wants.
Right.
So I'm teaching them how to use their breath, how to, use sound, how to be free to make noise, to use vibrations, and to use touch, to use alternate sensations, to experience pleasure and orgasm and orgasms that aren't necessarily quote unquote triggered by genital stimulation. I'm really teaching people to expand their repertoire.
Right, right.
Hi, it's Jessa here, taking just a quick break. Thanks for listening so far. I wanted to let you know about the sex quiz that I've put together called How Healthy Is Your Sex Life? I've taken a close look at the typical ways that I see couples get into trouble with sex, including avoidance, neglect, negativity, distraction, and boredom. And the free quiz will score your individual results based on these factors. And then I provide my recommendations and ideas, including my top 10 sex tips, which will help you make instant improvement. If you'd like to take the quiz and see how healthy your sex life is, you can do it right now at sexhealthquiz.com.
It's interesting because I talk in my work in my practice, right? I'm talking to people a lot about how their expectations are so throttling, right? The expectations are so limiting. And even for a heterosexual couple whose genitals are functioning, that's still such a limiting way to think about sex, right? Like it's, even if their bodies are working perfectly right now, things get rocky at some point. And it's so helpful to think, wait, we can throw all those beliefs out the window and start over, broader, right? Way more flexibility.
It can also be very, very scary too.
Yeah. So how do you, for most of the listeners who will not have had spinal cord injury, how do people start to apply some of these ideas? What do you recommend in terms of building sexual self-awareness?
Well, it's amazing. So like one of the techniques I believe very, very strongly in is sensate focus. And so that's using touch, right, to get in tune with sensations and with each other, and creating a way of touching, as they say, for your own interest, right? So many of us are really focused on pleasing the other, and our performance, that someone might say, well, they're not there for me. Well, they are, but they're there, but they're thinking about what you want, and they're performing for you, but they don't feel like their lover is connected, And so people need to understand that it's okay to focus on pleasing somebody for your own interest, or doing something for your own interest, and with this particular type of touch. So we teach people to use a touch that's, like a light touch, and to communicate, in one that's got more pressure. And to communicate this, and is it warm? Is it cool? Is it rough? Is it soft? And through doing these body exercises, first avoiding, and Masters and Johnson created these,
right?
But first by avoiding, breast and genitals, and then progressively sharing this touch, it really builds on people's communication, that sexual communication, and that consent that Peggy talked about, Dr. Kleinplatz, in her work. So that's one thing that I share with people, and then I use it definitely with people with spinal cord injuries, when a partner doesn't have one, or whether they do, and help them create this safe way of communicating verbally and non-verbally. And when you are touching someone for your own interest, in a way that, if the person receiving the touch will move your hand or redirect or something if they're not experiencing something, or if they're experiencing something that's uncomfortable.
Right.
But it's amazing with this relatively simple exercise. I'm using that with, obviously, I think it takes some guidance and stuff, but I mean, it just requires two people and touch. That's what I mean by relatively simple. Can really expand people's sexual communications tremendously. And then I'm also a big fan of Tantra. And once again, Tantra can take things to an esoteric level. And, and I've learned, like, my foundations, what I learned about Tantra was from Kenneth Ray Stubbs, who wrote a book called The Essential Tantra, who also acquired a spinal cord injury. And so we connected because someone asked me to reach out to him after he acquired his spinal cord injury. So I taught him a lot about sex and disability in general, and he taught me a lot about Tantra. And what we boiled it down to, and when I teach it, is stop, focus, and connect. So stop, right? We have to slow down.
Yeah.
Right? It's not about getting it up, getting it in, getting to it, rushing to it.
Right. It's not about driving. Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So we have to slow down, and we have to slow down. We have to stop all that thinking in our head, because Peggy talks about you want to be in the moment, in a flow situation.
Yeah.
And mindful, not like we're doing mindfulness exercises, but being in the moment, allowing yourself to be in the flow, not what Masters and Johnson calls is spectatoring, right?
Right.
So we want to slow down the chatter in our mind. We want to slow down the action. We want to focus, focus inward on our sensation, focus on our partners. And I say, with the right intention, right, and the right attention, anything could be erotic, right? So stop, focus, and then connect, whether it's through your eyes, through touch, through breath. And so like when my wife and I use wife because we use that versus partner, we don't sit on pillows and look at each other, in like perfect tantric positions.
Right.
But we incorporate mindfulness, tantra, yoga into just very flexible, non-scripted play.
Yeah.
Right. So if someone comes and they think Tantra,
right. That's too woo-woo or something, right?
Woo-woo, yeah. No.
Yeah.
They're just exercises. I do a workshop called Accessible Tantra, Mindfulness and the Yoga of Sex. And I tell people how they could take things like a mindfulness app. And these are even, I use these techniques with guys who come to me for premature ejaculation or rapid ejaculation, right? And they're using these techniques along with the sensate focus that I tell them to do with their masturbation. And they're just increasing their amount of time, by many minutes over a very short period of time.
Yeah.
Using these techniques. So they're all very valuable. They're all very accessible. And so you could use a mindfulness app. You could go to yoga, right? Because yoga helps you with your flexibility, your bed mobility, your breathing, right? So if you do these things in your other aspects of life, like sexuality is part of your life. It's not something that's just there for the moment when you're having sex.
Right.
So if you incorporate some of these practices into your life, you'll be more mellow and your sex will be more fun.
So, I'm hearing, I won't come up with everything that just crossed my mind, but I'm hearing some different themes in the things you're recommending, being present in the moment, slowing down, focusing on yourself, like doing things for your own pleasure, communication, right? Really learning what you actually like, as opposed to what you think you're supposed to like or the way it's supposed to be, what's actually developing that flexibility and maybe broadening the repertoire a little bit. It's not this tried and true, this thing we think is supposed to happen.
You forgot was the letting go.
Yeah, okay, and the letting go. Yeah, all of which benefits all of us, right? Spinal cord injury or not. So
it's funny because I was just reading a book, Limitless, which is about learning to learn by somebody who had a brain injury when he was growing up and now teaches everybody about learning. And he said, one of the first things to becoming limitless is forget what you think you know.
Yeah. It's so true in sex. Yeah.
It worries me when people think they know everything. It's like the more I learn, the less I know, the less I'm sure of.
Yeah. So what does it mean about orgasm if it's not tied to genitals, right? Like I think so many people are thinking, wait, you rub a certain body part enough until someone has an orgasm. And you're saying that's not, people are able to experience this without that. What's happening or what else is it about?
Talk to women who experience orgasm through nipple stimulation alone, I had women in my support group, in my research, one woman who had an orgasm when she was giving oral sex, the penis on the roof of her mouth triggered orgasm. So we know it's positive. People have orgasms in their sleep without touching their genitals. Mm-hmm. That's one of the easiest things to show how orgasm doesn't need to be there. So but can't say orgasm isn't connected with the genitals, right? Because we come to know orgasm, usually through masturbation or through whatever, through horseback riding, bicycle riding, or
right.
clothes rubbing, whatever, roller coaster. However we come to learn about orgasm, it's something that's, triggered. I use the word triggered, initiated, often first through genitals, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so we learn to connect orgasm with that. And then when we learn about Masters and Johnson sexual response cycle, the orgasm stage, we connect orgasm like with ejaculation and with genital contractions.
Right.
But that's a limited notion of orgasm. When you look at orgasm, and Beverly Whipple and Barry Komisarek looked at this in the lab, and Gina Ogden, right, initially, they looked at women who could orgasm through fantasy alone.
Right.
They called it thinking off. And, Beverly and Barry, measured this in the lab, right? So we knew that there were women who could have orgasm through fantasy alone, right? And so we've measured that. Barry has now done recently, I think, published earlier this year, fMRI mapping of the brain, right? Which we had maps of the brain that showed, the toes near the genitals, etc. But they were done in a different way. They were done by stimulating someone's brain, when they were awake and mapping it. Barry went a step further with a fMRI and people stimulating themselves in a machine. And he showed not only the toes or near the genitals, but also both male nipple, just like the female nipple, feeds into the brain at the same area as the genitals.
Huh. Okay.
So we could show, that the brain is quite flexible in what goes into there, and that we can, like I said, with the right focus and intention and the right stroking. I have talked to able-bodied women, and just like at a family event, who said, when people find out what we do, they tell
right. This is what you're talking about.
You're talking about, sitting on the couch with this guy that she liked, and he was just rubbing her arm, and she had an orgasm. So if your mind is in the right place, right, and you let your body follow, then you can learn. And I think it's a learning process. It just,
right.
I don't think it just happens. If, when you lose something and you go search for something else and you focus on it and you develop it. So I think it's a potentiality that our bodies have. And even stories of at least a story of a nun, who was celibate, who enjoyed meditating to watching the sunset, and that was orgasmic for her. Not just like orgasmic, but really orgasmic for her.
Yeah. Right. So it's not just a physical sensation or a particular event.
Oh, I'm saying it was a physical pleasure.
Oh, okay.
It wasn't orgasmic like I eat chocolate and say, "Oh, that's orgasmic."
Right.
It's so good. Yeah. I'm using the term literally.
Okay.
That watching the sunset could lead to an orgasm.
And what about? How important is orgasm? It's to me, that wouldn't be the definition of, like, that's not the only payoff of being sexual with a partner,
and
right?
actually, that's why I did my research on pleasure and orgasm.
Yeah.
It's funny. I use orgasm because quantitatively, right, you could look at some of the differences between orgasm and no orgasm.
Right.
Yeah, but orgasm isn't set up as the goal.
Right.
Like Beverly did her work on the G-spot, Beverly Whipple.
Yes.
She said, let's not let that be the best be the enemy of the good.
Right.
And Barry McCarthy talks about good enough sex.
Right.
And Barry and Rosemary Bassoon talks about like this female model of sexual response. And she looks at all the different motivations, the reasons people have to be receptive to sex besides orgasm.
Right.
And yes, so sex and sexual communicating and being physical with each other and being intimate with each other has a lot of positive rewards and benefits, even without orgasm.
Right. So
it's funny. Thank you for redirecting me, because the point isn't being the goal of orgasm, and so it might happen dependently for people all the time, but there's some people it doesn't, and that shouldn't keep you from being sexual, right? So if you feel like you're a failure because you didn't have an orgasm, or I'm not going to start because I can't finish, I'm sure you hear that.
Yes, right? I do.
I work with injured veterans, and I remember doing a group, I don't know, like, let's say 125 couples, right? With the one partner being seriously injured. And, you know, remember a woman standing up and saying, "Doc, what do I do if he can't finish?" Right. And so this might have been because of PTSD or brain injury or medication.
Right.
But people are totally lost.
Yeah.
And so I have to get into, you know, discussing what you and I might call sexual scripts. Right. And so people have their scripts. And I talk about, you better stop right there before you go any further, right? So people know Meatloaf's song about first base, second base. So people recognize the baseball script, right? We get first is kissing and second is touching, third fingering in the home run, right? And so people know, you know, KISSAING, first comes love, then comes marriage, then comes so-and-so and the baby carriage. Right. So there are nursery rhymes and there are things culturally we learn scripts from. And when we can't fulfill that role, when we can't pay that role, we can't fill that, we're lost. What do we do if he can't finish? So we have to help people write new scripts. Yeah.
I talk a lot about no matter what the sexual dysfunction might be or whatever's going on with somebody's body part, like it's nice to try to do what you can around functioning. It's nice to be able to, have an orgasm, be able to have an orgasm if you want one. And yet, if you can't, or if this thing isn't going to change, or it's not going to happen this particular day, how do you just optimize your experience that you have access to, right? It's not dependent on that functioning. Or it's not
you may be on a drug that we can't stop, a medication that can't stop, because if you stop it, it's going to put yourself in more depression or more danger, right? But, to get somebody to embrace the fact that they could be sexual in a different way, and if their partner wants penetration, there's other ways, just there's plenty of things you can use for penetration besides a penis, or, if it's affecting your lubrication, there's plenty of things we could use for lubrication.
Right.
So some people do take pleasure in connecting, whether it's through intercourse or through touch or through the internet. They take pleasure in connecting in a sexual and intimate way.
Yeah.
And the inability to experience orgasm, whether it is because of fatigue, stress, other aspects, medical aspects, medications, nerve damage that makes it more difficult. If people are willing to explore pleasure without having an expectation of orgasm, that will keep, I think, them in a lot more healthier spot, sexually speaking.
Right. All right. So you already talked about using something like sensate focus and conscious, tantra, potentially conscious masturbation, whatever, various techniques that you use with people. I'd sort of like you to wrap up with how would you invite able-bodied couples to sort of, how do you motivate them to do a little bit of this instead of just going with the thing that's working before they need to expand the repertoire? How do you invite them into, what's the value of doing this, even if everything's working fine?
Well, the value of doing everything is maybe including getting a little bit more fun. It's so funny. A lot of people, they're working at sex, and like Peggy says, it takes effort.
Yeah.
But when you work at sex, it doesn't work, or it becomes routine or stale. So, there are different things like trust, safety, and connection that I talk about. I also talk about creativity, adaptability, and a sense of humor.
Mm.
So I don't think anyone can argue that being more creative in the bedroom isn't going to help.
Yeah.
And I bet you if partners would speak up with each other, they probably would each like to say to their partner, hey, this has been great for all these years, but maybe a little creative, right?
Yeah.
And, well, maybe we could adapt this and I'd be a little bit more comfortable. I really haven't told you that I probably let go more, or probably have a better thing if I wasn't, uncomfortable during this experience, or I don't like that position, right? And a sense of humor, right? So when we work and we're working hard and we have these expectations and these goals and we're not meeting them, then we get negative, right?
Right.
Versus people with disabilities learn very easily, very, very quickly that you need to have a sense of humor if something doesn't work.
Yeah.
We can't take ourselves too seriously. We can't take sex too seriously, right? We can't take leaking, during sex. If you have like an incontinence issue and you get your partner a little wet, it's like, we can't let that shut us down,
Yeah.
We have to, be able to laugh about it, then put something waterproof down next time if you're worrying about it.
Right, right.
So,
yeah. So value getting out of the routine, basically, right? Creative, fun, playful, sense of humor. Go back maybe to the drawing board and think, wait, what else could I like besides what we've narrowed our sex life down to?
And play, it's to be more playful. The opposite of work is play.
Right.
And most sex isn't reproductive, right? Yeah. And if you just want to have a quickie and have an orgasm because it helps you relax before you go to bed, fine, right? More power to you. But if you want to play, if you want to take the afternoon off or take more time and have a longer experience, then you can be more playful, you be more creative.
Yeah, cool. All right. So where can people find you? Where do they learn more about you? Get in touch with you if they want to. What you have to offer?
drmitchelltepper.com. So they go to my website, drmitchelltepper.com, and the contact form, thank goodness, works reliably, so that you can contact me, through there.
Okay. And you've got your book, right? I'll put all these links in the show notes too, so people can easily access that. So
regain that feeling. Secrets to Sexual Self-Discovery. Although it's got someone with spinal cord injury on the cover, it's not just for people with spinal cord injuries.
Yeah.
And that's, I may rewrite that book and put a new cover on it so that more people will be open to it, picking it up without injuries. It's one of the best sellers in that area, but I really want other people to learn from our experiences.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that's the takeaway of this interview is that all of this stuff is so relevant to everybody, no matter how their body works. I mean, it's just so important. So,
absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thank you again for being with me.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Better Sex. Please visit our website, bettersexpodcast.com, for show notes and additional episodes.
And that's a wrap for today. I really hope you enjoyed the episode. If you are enjoying the podcast, if some of this material resonates with you and you would like to make a difference and make sure that this keeps coming out in the world once a week, ongoing, there are a couple things you could do to show your appreciation. The first would be to go to iTunes and rate and review the show. That really helps us be found by new listeners when you review the show on iTunes. You can find a link at bettersexpodcast.com/iTunes. The other thing I want to invite you to consider is becoming a Patreon. For a small monthly pledge, you get some benefits. So for $2 a month, you get advance access to every single episode. For $5 a month, you get a chapter of my upcoming new book. And for $10 a month, I host quarterly get-to-know-you and question-and-answer chats over the web, and you get invited to that. I would love to have your membership in that, become part of the Better Sex family. You can find a link at bettersexpodcast.com/Patreon, which is Patreon. Again, thanks for listening. I'm glad you're here. Feel free to comment, ask questions, get in touch. I'd love to hear from listeners. Thanks.